Welcome to the Tech Exits Podcast. We've got something a little different for you today, an investors panel discussion focused on one big question. Where are health tech investors interested in putting their money? Joining us are leading voices from Co-Founders Capital, Saroba Life Sciences, and Triangle Tweener Fund to discuss what do tech investors prioritize when evaluating opportunities? What is the impact of AI on investment strategies? And when should entrepreneurs seek investment versus considering an M&A exit? This discussion originally took place during the WFS flagship conference, Growth and Exit Strategies, HealthTech, on April 3rd, 2025. Moderating this panel is David Levine, Regional Manager of the Quorum Group, our platinum sponsor. Now, without further ado, let's listen in.
Really excited to move into this panel. We've got some investors with us. We have David Gardner from Co-Founders Capital. We've got Daniel O'Mahony from Saroba Life Sciences and Robbie Allen from Triangle Tweener Fund. We're excited to have a conversation with them today about what they're seeing in their part of the investment cycle. So with that, I'd like to maybe do some quick intros. So David, maybe why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your fund?
Certainly. My name is David Gardner. I was a serial entrepreneur most of my life, doing B2B SaaS software, started several companies, exited them. And about 10, 12 years ago, I became a professional investor, then ultimately began starting funds. We're investing now Co-Founders Capital out of its third $50 million fund. We do very early stage B2B software here in the Triangle, North Carolina.
Great. Thanks, David. And Daniel, it'd be great to learn more about you.
Daniel O'Mahony, I'm a partner with Saroba. We're a life science venture capital fund, headquartered in Dublin with an office in Paris and an office in Milan. We're primarily pan-European focused, investing in companies developing new medical devices or new drugs. But we also have the capacity to do select investments in North America and look forward to this panel discussion today. Thank you, David.
Great. Thanks, Daniel. And Robbie.
Hi, I'm Robbie Allen. Like David, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started a number of companies, generally in the AI space, especially before AI was cool, which wasn't so cool. It's easy to sell now, but not so much then, starting in 2010. And then 3 years ago, me and my partner started the Triangle Tweener Fund, which is an index fund of Triangle, which is Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, technology startups. And we've invested in over 135 companies in the last 3 years, 180 investments, approaching 9 million total investment. And we touch pretty much all the different types of technology, except we tend to stay out of medical device and anything requiring FDA approval.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for your introductions. And I've been working in health tech for over 35 years. So excited to learn more about the types of things that you guys are investing in and the things you think about as you're considering investments and considering getting your companies to grow, as well as getting them ready for an exit. So I guess I would open this up, and feel free to add comments as people are commenting here. But maybe Daniel, you could share what are the fundamental characteristics of a company that you typically invest in?
So, David, I would say the clear characteristics are, number one, because we invest in companies developing new medical devices, which may have an AI component, or indeed new drugs, which may be reliant on the use of AI. We typically look for companies where we can clearly understand the clinical development pathway, because for us, the clinical data is obviously very important. In the medtech space, we like to be assured that there's a clear reimbursement pathway for a new technology as well, because at the end of the day, somebody has to pay for this device, and it's good to understand what are the reimbursement codes, what's the approach towards healthcare insurers as well. We like to understand what is the competition, what is a clear differentiation of this technology we're investing in versus others, and does it address a clear unmet clinical need? That's obviously important. Management team experience is also important, but recognizing that management teams can be added to and supplemented as a company goes through different stages of technology development. Is there a defendable IP or patent estate? And lastly, how many buyers are in the sector? Is it one buyer or is it 10 buyers? That creates a very different dynamic. later on when you're looking towards an M&A and an exit for your fund and your investors. So they're probably the key characteristics that we would look at, David.
Thanks, Daniel. Robbie, how about yourself?
Yeah, so we're again a broad-based fund where we invest in, our focus are what we call tweeners, which are companies above $1 million in revenue, say below 80 million in revenue. So there's some traction there that's important for us. We're not, because we invest in so many companies, tend to, 15 to 20 companies a quarter. We tend to not be the first check in a round. We're not going to be leading around. We're not going to be setting terms. And so we want to see, credible evidence of a round forming and is in place. We typically require half of a round to be committed before we're investing. We didn't need that a couple of years ago, but now I'm seeing it all too commonly where entrepreneurs have the best intentions of getting a round done. They start off and aren't able to complete it, or they're not able to get to as much as they want. So for us, we're looking for a little bit of traction, not only with the business, but also with the fundraise. That's an important aspect of our process.
David, how about from your perspective?
Sure. Our fund thesis is B2B SaaS software, very early stage in the Southeast U.S. Geography. Nothing's too early for us. We like to be the first investor in, first money in, although we will come in on a C2 kind of round as well. For every $1 million we put into a company, we reserve a couple of million to protect that company. And I always say you only need more money if things are going well or things aren't going well. But of course, all the things that Daniel and Robbie have talked about, we like to invest in business software that solves a problem, and that can be across multiple sectors. We do a lot in healthcare, IT. We do a lot in fintech, manufacturing. All three of my partners are serially successful entrepreneurs, and so we try to find things that we have some subject matter expertise in ourselves. We know that particular industry. It needs to be a top 3 or 4 problem. When we start doing our diligence, if people don't tell us that it's the top 3 or 4 problem that they're trying to solve this year, then we're probably not interested. And of course, better, faster, cheaper, something you can write a white paper on. Proven value props is what we look for. We avoid B2C, we avoid crypto, we avoid security things, just because that's not particularly things that we have expertise in, my team. And finally, a great entrepreneur, as Daniel said, if you don't have a great entrepreneur, you don't have anything. So it can be a first-time entrepreneur. We're okay with that, but it needs to be someone that we feel encapsulates all of the things that we want to see in a startup entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the bar is high. You mentioned subject matter expertise, so it sounds like if between your co-founders, if there isn't subject matter expertise, you typically wouldn't look outside for that. You want to keep it close to what you guys actually already know.
No, we've done some things where I wouldn't say we had direct. I guess all of it kind of falls under productivity software. Mm-hmm. So indirectly, we have expertise. So there are certainly some things that we've done where we didn't have direct expertise, but we had LPs in our fund. We have hundreds of LPs across our funds. And like this morning, I was talking to 2 presidents of banks that are LPs in our fund, looking at a fintech app for banks. And so it's great when you have a network like that you can go to and say, hey, what do you think about this? And a lot of the stuff we love, they will shoot down pretty quick. So it's, we want to know someone who's been in that industry their whole life and knows everything there is to know about it.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I'd like to maybe shift over to kind of the market sectors that, you probably see a lot of opportunities. And so how do you choose which market sector to really focus on? Is there a prioritization that changes over the year, or do you guys set a mandate? Maybe Robbie, you can take that one, because it sounds like you guys are super active on like a quarterly basis, seeing a lot of deal flow.
Yeah, we don't have a specific, focus within a given sector. Again, we've invested in over 30 health tech companies alone in the last 3 years. But what I will say that's become increasingly important to me as I evaluate companies is the go-to-market. Especially over the last 10 to 15 years, early on, call it in the 2000s, it was still an environment that if you build something cool, you could get noticed for it. Things like Twitter and social media was still relatively new. Some of the better technology solutions could find a market, even if you didn't have the best go-to-market strategy. Now, in an era of just a significant proliferation of software and solutions, it's increasingly hard to get noticed. And so, now it's not uncommon if an entrepreneur comes to me and says, "Yeah, we got a better mousetrap." I hate to bust the bubble, but that's not nearly enough nowadays. I've seen lots of companies that have better mousetraps that don't make it past their seed round. They have to have a good go-to-market strategy and a good plan to acquire customers, or it's just going to be a non-starter.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I think oftentimes we see CEOs overlook the go-to-market approach and how that needs to evolve as the business grows. Daniel, how about yourself? Like what are some key areas that you seem to be focusing on right now as you're looking at deal flow?
Sure. So in our last couple of funds, we've supported companies bringing maybe 23 different medical device products to the market in Europe, USA, Japan, and 10 different drugs in the oncology space. We look at neuro. We like the neuro space because there's huge unmet clinical needs. Time is brain, as they say. So being able to go into the vasculature in the brain of patients who've had a stroke and recover that clot very quickly, we feel that's a very important area for medical development. And then on top of that, good imaging technologies, let's say CT scans of the brain in a patient following a stroke, whereby through different app technologies, that information can be sent to the clinician pretty much in real time, and it allows for quicker diagnosis, remote diagnosis, and a quick decision making in terms of how to treat patients like that. We've been very active investors in the cardiovascular space, companies like Indotronics, which is in remote patient monitoring, using implanted sensors, AI technology in order for a clinician to be able to better manage patients who suffer from congestive heart failure, keep those patients out of the hospital and break that cycle of patients having repeat visits to the hospital to treat their condition. These are very important technologies, not just to patients and clinicians, but to hospitals and payers as well. In the area of digital health, we invested in a company called DesFX, developing digitizing clinical pathology. When patients go to hospital, they get a biopsy sample taken, it goes to the clinical pathology lab for analysis. That's a very important step in terms of decision making. What's this patient suffering from? So what this company has done is digitize clinical pathology, build a network of over 200 clinical pathology expertise around them, which allows the clinical pathology group in a hospital to take that data in a slide, digitize it through our technology, sent remotely to a network of over 200 clinical pathologists in both North America and Europe. So you get a second opinion or a subject matter or a disease matter expert opinion pretty much overnight. And this really shortens the time for rapid decision making and how to treat patients who may be suffering from, serious cancer or some other type of indications. And the other areas we like are rare diseases. Orphan diseases are huge. There's huge unmet clinical need today. We like to support technologies developing new drugs for, things like Huntington's disease and so forth as well. So, the heart, the brain, orthopedics, these are all spaces that we look at, and the implementation of AI technology on top of some of these devices. We've been active in this space, and we see a lot of growth and potential in that sector as well in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, super interesting. Obviously, these are important sectors overall, a lot going on there. And I guess, David, I'm circling back to you. I mean, so as you're thinking about sectors that you're focusing on, any key sectors, and then within that, Robbie brought up the whole go-to-market. Like, how do you think about go-to-market as you're evaluating opportunities? And have there been situations where you've seen a great technology, but the go-to-market didn't make sense?
Oh, sure. You see that all the time. You can't identify a buyer. The sales cycle is just too long. And when you talk about industries, we try to be kind of, not really focus on a particular industry, but I do notice that our funds tend to do that. And I think it's just what's going on at the time. Our first fund was very healthcare IT focused. Our third fund has very little healthcare IT. I think we have one, maybe two companies. And part of that is just the sales cycle has gotten so long, especially selling to hospitals. I wrote an article on this a few months back, and I think the title of the article was "Elongated Sales Cycles Killing Innovation in Healthcare." And what it is the hospitals keep buying each other. They become these massive, entities, and you have to spend a year getting on a master services contract, and then that's just a license to hunt. That's no revenue. Then you got to go sell the hospitals one at a time, and then when you sell a hospital, and you got to be integrated with the EMR, and then the IT guys are going, well, there's a 6 month to a year wait on EMR integrations, and so you're sitting there looking at a 3-year sales cycle. Startups can't manage burn for 3 years, and investors don't want to hang in there for 3 years before they find out whether their solution has a business. And it's just killing IT innovation. And I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but it's backed us right off of a lot of, I thought, really great innovative companies with great technology, but the sales cycle was just too long for it to be a reasonable fit for our fund.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sales cycle for sure. I mean, not clearly understanding the ICP, like we see these big issues, right? Especially, when companies are trying to grow. And that's super interesting and great insights. I guess, maybe moving to another area, maybe Robbie, you can pick this one up. So what are some examples of either a company or technologies that recently have gotten you super excited?
Yeah. So, we have a pretty diverse portfolio. So we have a lot of companies that, we're seeing. It's obvious that I would say the ones that tend to bubble up to the top right now are going to be the more AI oriented companies that are leveraging AI in interesting and unique ways. And in fact, what we've seen over the last, I would call it 6 to 9 months, are the AI first startups that are bubbling up. Where there's, you look, typical lifespan of a startup before they're going to get acquired or, potentially go public is anywhere from 10 to 15 years. So there's a lot of companies that have been started in the past, call it 10 years or so, that weren't AI first. And they're all kind of scrambling to figure out how do they leverage AI, to take advantage of it, versus companies that were started, say, while ChatGPT came out in late 2022, early 2023, it took a year before that technology really started to develop and companies could start to figure out how to use it. So really 2024, if a company got started then, they could arguably claim to be sort of an AI first company. And it's many of those that we're starting to see bubble up that, they have a smaller cost footprint. They don't need to hire as many developers because they're leveraging a lot of the AI tools. They're incorporating AI in interesting ways that previously you'd had to have a lot of people to do some of those types of operations. And so, yeah, we're seeing a number of companies do that. We have one locally called Gradient Health that's actually providing imaging to health systems and other people that that want to train their own machine learning models to do detection of various sorts. And they're essentially providing a lot of the infrastructure around the images that are necessary to do training of different types. So it's companies like that we're seeing that really are, taking advantage of AI in the right ways. We're also seeing, companies pop up that, are claiming AI. I think every startup now claims to be an AI startup, but, it's pretty easy to, within a first, 15, 20 minutes to assess whether this isn't really an AI first kind of company. They're just saying they're using AI when really they're not leveraging it in a unique way. But the ones that are, they certainly have, I think the lion's share of the upside in the next few years, and they're having an easier time raising funding, and things of that nature.
Yeah, no, certainly we're seeing AI in many and most of the companies that we talk to as well. David, how about from your perspective? Are there examples of a company or technologies that recently in the last 6 months or so got you super excited, and how did it turn out?
Yeah, we're also focused on AI, but more of the small language models rather than the large language model type applications. And I wrote an article in this last week on why the money's being made right now for early stage investors, not in building AI infrastructure, but in training AIs on local data. And it avoids a lot of issues, a lot of problems. They're highly more accurate, but training it on a very specific problem. And we've done really well with a few exits recently where the AI was targeted, just being trained, so there's no data ownership issues. It doesn't tend to have the hallucinations of a large language model. And I'm also concerned that a lot of the large language model things are going to ultimately get sucked into the core AIs and won't be a standalone product anymore. We saw a lot of that happen with browsers back in the day. There were a lot of startups that were really promising, but then they were given away for free by the browser. And so, that's a horrible thing once you, gone down that path. So we don't invest in, we see AI as kind of the price of admission. If you're not, deploying AI in some way, you're probably not a state-of-the-art solution today. So it's really just the price of admission.
Yeah, no, makes a ton of sense. And then, Daniel, similar question to you. Like, how do you I'm sure you see a lot of companies. Like, how do you decipher, hey, this is something we get excited about, and then how do you think about AI as well as you're looking at these businesses or these opportunities?
Sure. So one of the areas we're excited by right now is the whole area of radiopharmaceuticals. We were investors in a company called Fusion out of Toronto that was acquired last year for $2.4 billion by AstraZeneca. But, we had a huge amount of learning there in terms of basically, we're all aware of radiation to treat cancer. But what companies like Fusion are doing and other companies in this space, they're trying to bring the radiation directly to the cancer cell or into the nucleus of the cancer cell in order to try and damage the DNA and kill those cancer cells. So this is a technology which it's a question of finding the right target in those cancer cells, using AI and ML as part of that discovery process, and then being able to develop a fully integrated company in order to do the clinical trials and deliver those types of products into the market. In the area of remote patient monitoring, I mentioned Indotronics, a company in Chicago we invested with in our last fund. It was acquired last year by Edward Life Sciences. This is a remote patient monitoring technology. It's a sensor in the blood vessel from your lungs to your heart. That sensor captures the pressure, it sends it to the cloud, it integrates it with other physiological data, and then the patient or the care nurse sees this information in real time and can see whether the patient who has congestive heart failure, if that condition is progressing or getting worse. So it allows for earlier intervention, changing their drug medication, maybe giving them higher doses, and keeping those patients out of hospital or breaking the cycle of repeat hospitalization. And that's only possible because it's integrating big data, AI, with a whole range of different physiological type features and measurements. And then DESIFX, as I mentioned, DESIFX probably has the largest clinical pathology database in the world today. It's been adopted by hospitals in Europe and now into North America. And that's only possible using AI and ML in order to allow the clinical pathologist to be able to make more definitive and accurate assessments and determinations on biopsy samples which come into clinical pathology laboratories in most hospitals in the world today. On the drug discovery side, there are different AI black boxes which are used today as part of early stage drug discovery. We're investors in a company in Italy called Sibila. They've got a really unique way to try and identify new kind of epitopes or targets or regions on proteins or targets for drug discovery and drug development. But that's only possible using high-end computational modeling, AI, ML, and to be able to integrate that with very, very good understanding of biology as part of the whole drug discovery and drug development process. I came across a company last week to have a computational drug library with 1 by 10 to the 21 different drug molecule shapes in it. I had to look it up. The number is called 6 trillion. But it's an enormous number of molecules to try and farm through and identify a new drug lead. And again, it's only possible using AI, ML, and a whole load of technology like that to try and fish out and find that drug molecule that could be of interest to your particular target or your particular company. So, AI is important, not just in medtech, but also in the whole biopharma space today.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess maybe I'll open this up to the group. Like, it sounds like, or I guess the question would be like, will you even invest in a company that isn't utilizing AI? And then as you're looking at the business, looking at the tech, like what are the risks that you're trying to figure out as you're looking at the business and thinking that through the lens of, we need to underwrite this. How should we think about AI? Is there some type of an approach or a specific approach we should take to the risks associated with it? And I'll just open it up. Maybe, I don't know, Robbie, if you want to jump on that one first, but love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So for me, the two things kind of almost above all else that I look at, and this is beyond like checking out the entrepreneurs, solid team, all of that. Again, to me, that really is table stakes. The two things are defensibility in the age of AI and go to market, right? And so would we invest in a company that's not leveraging AI to the fullest? Yeah, possibly. I mean, like if they had an amazing go to market and they had some and they have some product that took advantage of that go to market effectively and it didn't require AI, I would say that's and it's defensible, right? Because again, that's the other piece of it, but that we would consider that. I mean, the challenge that I have as I look at companies, and this kind of gets to what David was saying before, is I have a hard time thinking through how many companies are going to be able to survive in 1 to 2 years, for continuing on an exponential curve with AI development. And frankly, even if we're not, I mean, a lot of people said, you'll hear stories about, we've reached a plateau of some of the foundational models and things aren't going to improve from here. That's almost besides the point. I think if we stop all development today, we still have a 10-year backlog of incorporating what's available today into the environment. And so not to mention, if it keeps going at the rate that it's been going, it's going to be hard for a lot of early startups to be defensible, because I agree with David that, what you're going to see, and you're already seeing it, is that these AI companies are going to consume more and more use cases, as they grow and raise more money, and they got to show a bigger TAM and they got to do all these things. It's going to be natural for them to start to swallow up these other types of things that they could potentially do. So, in many ways, I'm very pro human oriented thing, like things that require human touch, like we've invested in a number of things that require physicians, at least right now. You can't, I have a company, Bionic Health, where we're trying to automate a doctor, but you can't automate a doctor fully because the FDA won't allow it. So, you have to have, if you want, medication prescribed to you, that has to be a human doctor today. Now, maybe that changes in the future, but right now it's still the case. You have to have a human doing that. And so that's pretty defensible, at least for now, right? And so, we kind of look at those kind of things. What are things that, still require people, or there's not, no matter how good the technology is, at least AI can't do that yet. Again, all bets are off in the future, but, we kind of look out as far as we can, which is really only the next year or two.
Yeah. Daniel, David, thoughts on that?
So I would say for us, the biggest challenge is, a lot of our companies are involved in clinical development, and will their findings translate from what they see in a preclinical disease model into the human? And human biology is very, very complex. And then it partly comes down to the question, are you evaluating, let's say, your new drug or your new medical device in the right patient population? So then it becomes a question, what is the right patient population for your drug or your technology to be evaluated in? And can you use the use of, precision diagnostics and AI learnings in order to try and help the company or the clinician to select the right patients in order to evaluate your drug for the particular type of disease that they're looking to treat? But that is the biggest challenge today, that translation from a preclinical disease model into humans, and trying to make smarter decisions quicker, earlier. If we got it right every time, there would be some great drugs in the world today, but clinical failure is inevitable in terms of what we do.
Yeah, I tried. coming from a technology background, I work very hard not to be enamored with the technology, because people don't buy technology, they buy a solution. The technology is really just a necessary evil. I often tell entrepreneurs, if you sold a green M&M with the same value props, they would just buy your green M&Ms. And so, you know, it is easy to get enamored with the tech and think because it's a great or an elegant technical solution that it's a good business solution, and that's not necessarily the case. AI is just a tool. I've often said the best thing about AI is entrepreneurs stop saying blockchain. Because blockchain was not a business. It wasn't a business solution. In fact, we saw over and over again, it wasn't even necessary. Who needs a distributed ledger when, for apps that were just used inside the firewall? Yeah, it was like an over elaborate, over expensive and complex architecture. And so then it's just adding cost and complexity for no reason. So even though almost everything we're seeing today is, I think, applying AI in a good way, I don't think that AI is a fit for every solution. And I do think that there are things out there where AI is good at certain things. It can summarize wonderfully. It can try lots of combinations of things. It can find patterns of things. But once you move outside of those 6 or 7 things that AI does really well, you're really applying an overly complicated architecture and expense unnecessarily to your business solution.
Yeah. No, great. Excellent points on AI. We could probably spend another hour talking about it because it's, on the radar for everybody, I think. I'd like to move over to, thinking about, CEOs that are on here or founders that are on. Like, what are typical mistakes that you've seen entrepreneurs make? And if you had to give them some nuggets of advice, what might it be? David, why don't you kick us off on that?
Well, I mean, if you do this long enough, you see all the mistakes. You see the great founder, and they're all out of the gate, early stage, control freaks. And it's great. You almost need to be a control freak to get a company off the ground and manage everything. You have to be able to do everything moderately well. But very quickly, as the organization grows, that person becomes the bottleneck, and they can't delegate. They're going around management and talking direct, not respecting the chain of command. And so I've been, developed a whole series of talks with entrepreneurs about, do you want to be the CEO or do you want to be rich? And hopefully they go for rich. But it's they can make lots of mistakes. They cannot be cash efficient. They can spend too much money building a solution, thinking they're just one feature away from solving all their business problems. And there's lots of things. But the thing that I try to get teams to focus on is sales and marketing. You can survive and fix almost any business, any startup problem other than a lack of sales. That one will sink you faster because you run out of runway. On contrary, if you have good sales and money coming in, then you have the runway and the capital to fix all the other issues, the product issues and the support issues or implementation issues. So I really try to get them to focus. And it's hard sometimes when you have technology founders for them to realize that technology really is a necessary evil.
Yeah. Oh, great insights. I think there's an HBR article called Rich or King, and it goes right at that, right? So, Robbie, how do you assess that, right? You got a limited amount of time. You got a lot of data coming at you. How do you figure out, these call it binary issues that are going to be part of that CEO that you're trying to invest in?
Part of it that I try to understand early on is like, what's their time horizon? Because, if you're not coming into a startup with at least a 10-year time horizon, or if you think, this is something that, you're going to be able to turn around in 2 to 3 years and get out and have a great exit, then you don't have the right frame of mind. Now, not to say that companies can't happen and have good exits in that time frame. It's just very unlikely and very rare. And so, you have to be willing to sign up for a long-term effort and kind of to David's point, it's, you can't assume you're going to, be rich in those, those years. It's not going to, it's not like you could go make more money working at a bigger company than you can starting a company. And so if near-term money is a priority, then running a startup is not going to be the right fit. And so, some of it is just trying to assess that, like where's their head at, like how, I don't think that every entrepreneur has to be mission driven necessarily. But it sure doesn't hurt. And, especially if it's something that the founder, it just lives and breathes, and like this, they've had a track record of working in this space and they like the space, or it is a mission for them, that goes a long way, because, again, that kind of gets into when the going gets tough, which it will for every startup. The roller coaster is real. I don't care how many startups you've done. I'm on my fourth. The roller coaster happens all the time. If I see it frequently, you go through that first valley, and a lot of entrepreneurs will bail, and it just gets hard. And it's interesting, right? Because like the best entrepreneurs I've ever known are the ones I look back and they've been at it 10 years. And I've known them when like they were in the depths of despair, out of money, out of hope. And yet somehow they figured out a way, and they fought through it. And now they're coming back on the other end of it, and they're, doing extremely well. And so, you got to understand or try to assess, like, is this entrepreneur I'm talking to, is that somebody that's going to be willing to go through that? And it's not easy, sometimes, it's almost, it's just like a resume. You're not exactly getting, the real story from a single conversation. It's why relationships over time is going to be a better indicator. But that's certainly, an area I focus on.
Yeah, no, great insights. And, Daniel, just to pull this out a little bit deeper. So, you've assessed the entrepreneur, you're working with them, but you got to course correct, right? And like, how do you go about that? How do you get the entrepreneur hopefully back on track?
It certainly happens in our sector. It's a question of surrounding yourself with the best people, the best experts in some cases. Don't be afraid to pivot. Having people on your board or on your chair who have prior experience in the sector, who've been through the hard times, who've kind of learned the mistakes, try and benefit from that and try and learn from that. Companies need a plan A, they need a plan B. They spend less time thinking about the plan B than they do the plan A, but you always need an escape mechanism, I think, at the end of the day. And then for those companies who do hit a brick wall, it's a question of trying to, step back, look at things calmly and logically where you can, and try and focus on where the key value add activities would be. Some entrepreneurs try to boil the ocean when they shouldn't be looking to boil the ocean. And for some entrepreneurs, they probably need to learn the 50 ways to say no, because entrepreneurs kind of are always afraid to say no to their investors and people like that. But sometimes you have to learn the 50 ways to say no to focus on what you believe and your advisors believe is the best strategy for your particular business. But I think today is certainly one of the toughest climates for entrepreneurs for a range of different reasons, from funding shortfalls to changes in the regulatory landscape and so forth. So you need somebody with the resilience and the capability to get through the hard times, with the right people around them to make that happen.
Yeah, no, excellent points. And then to taking that in a slightly different direction, like what advice would you give an entrepreneur to when they're trying to figure out the best investor for them, right? What are the things they should be thinking about, asking at a very high level? I don't know if somebody wants to take us on this first journey here on this one.
Well, I got, an opinion on this. Again, I'm in the Southeast, and, maybe I'm different than some, but, I kind of chuckle a little bit anytime an entrepreneur comes to me and says, all right, Robbie, I'm getting ready to start fundraising, and I've made my list of the 7 or 8 VCs that I'm going to go approach, and I really want to, raise money from. And I say 7 or 8. Wow. When you've gotten 50 no's, let me know, because then you've just gotten started. Mm-hmm. In the Southeast, it's challenging raising money, and I mean it's challenging anywhere. But I think if you're not in the Bay Area, New York, maybe Austin, It's not like there's just a lot of local capital just ready to go and easily willing to invest in startups. It's a full-time job and then some, just raising a round of funding. And the idea that you can have a fairly short list that's mostly tailored on like these people would be perfect. Again, not to say that doesn't happen. It's just not very common that it works out that way. And you're much better to go more broadly and cast a wide net, because more than likely you're going to get no's from just about all those people, and you're going to be going on to your second and third and fourth tier list. So again, if you're in a situation where you have lots of options and you're picking between different types of investors, that's great. Typically what I coach entrepreneurs on is, look at their track record. The last thing that you want to be in as an entrepreneur is a situation where either your board or your investors want to become activists or start to try to take over the company or move it in a different direction, especially in the very early stages. And I've seen that happen numerous times, and it just wrecks a company, and it almost never works out well ultimately. And that's why I'm surprised that certain investors do that. But you certainly don't want to be that. So you want somebody, obviously, I'm sure typical VCs will say, you want somebody that's going to add value and can make connections. Of course, you want all that stuff. But what my perspective is, do no harm. That's what you really want in the early days, because they can do lots of harm if you have the right, or the wrong mix of people around you. So do no harm. And then hopefully they can also add lots of value. Now, again, they're adding value by investing. So that's I don't want to understate that, but it is a challenging situation for entrepreneurs in that, they need money, they're raising money. In some cases, maybe they don't have a lot of options. And so they have to go with what options they have in front of them, but they have to be careful not to get in a situation where those investors then may have undue pressure, that may cause the company go in the opposite direction that the entrepreneur wants.
Yeah. No, great insights. Daniel, David?
Yeah.
So, after you, David.
Go ahead. Well, I tell entrepreneurs that the best thing you can do is find a sophisticated investor in your space who tells you no and tells you why. The companies that we've had the best exits on are ones that we said no to 2 or 3 times. And why? And they just kept iterating, coming back, and eventually they fixed or pivoted around all of our objections, and it became an investable company. Mm-hmm. And that is really what you want to see. I always tell entrepreneurs, if all you get is money when you part with equity, you got screwed. You want to make sure, and I like to say that raising money is not a problem for a startup. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to get the right people aligned with your success, the people who can help you. And I've had entrepreneurs that I've worked with for a year, and they'd gotten a higher valuation on a term sheet somewhere else and still came back and took my term sheet, because they said all that really matters is not the valuation on the term sheet, it's how much money I put in my pocket when we exit this. And we just felt like that number would be bigger working with you than the passive investors. And to Robbie's point, you have to be careful. You want value-added investors, of course, but as he said, you want investors who do no harm. I've been on the receiving end of money for decades before I became an investor. So I'm much more comfortable on that side of the table. And I had to deal with I had angel investors who put 10 grand in my companies, and they were convinced that I worked for them after that, So I like to tell entrepreneurs that you have to make all the decisions. We don't make decisions for your company. We'll give you advice. We'll tell you what I would do in that situation. I might make you listen to a sad story, how I did something and really screwed it up one time. But ultimately, we can't hold you accountable unless you get to make all the decisions. The only decision that the board makes is whether or not you should stay in that job. And all CEOs make mistakes, and you want to let them make mistakes because they're learning, especially early on. You want to make as many mistakes as you can as quickly as possible, because that's how you figure it out. But ultimately, if we see high turnover, if we're coaching a CEO and they just can't delegate responsibility, if they're becoming the thing holding the company back. At some point, the one decision we will make as a board is we'll say, you can have any other job you want in the company, but we need to bring in, adult supervision here, because we're all going to lose unless we fix this problem. Most of them are coachable. The vast majority of our entrepreneurs, you can coach through that, but there are some that there's a few that you run into every few years that just aren't going to get it. They just can't let go. It's their baby, and they've got to micromanage it to the end, right off a cliff. And in those cases, then the board does have to make that one decision of bringing in different leadership. But as long as the board says you're the leader, you get to call all the shots.
Yeah. Great insights. Daniel, thoughts on all of this?
So, for entrepreneurs, it could take a year of engagement with an investor or a syndicate to secure investment. So, meet your investors early, tell them you're going to come back in 6 months' time to show them what you said you're going to deliver on, and use that time to establish your credibility and your pedigree and so forth. So it's, investment is a touch sport at the end of the day. So you need to be able to prove your capability and your credentials over time with investors before they invest. Investors do diligence on you. You should do diligence on your investors as well. As the other panel member said, a good board is one that keeps his head in and keeps his hands out. And, the board or the investors putting their hands in too often and too many times can be very, very frustrating for management teams and founders. But when you're talking to your investors, how much will you commit? How much will you reserve? How much can you reserve after that? I think the other consideration is, as a potential investor in my company, how can I work with you or you work with me to try and build a syndicate such that we can really shoot for the moon? So, what's the reach of your potential investor in terms of growing an international syndicate in order to deliver on the possibilities? And as I said earlier, surround yourself with the best advice, be it in Europe or the USA or Japan, wherever it might be. The best experts, be it regulatory or clinical or product development, whatever it might be. But, don't be afraid to ask questions, because you'll be surprised how willing people are willing to help who've kind of been through it before. And I suppose at the end of the day, it's all about focus. As I said earlier, don't try and boil the ocean, but kind of really focus on the key value add activities.
Yeah.
I'll pile on to that, David, that board members have to be careful, because there are some entrepreneurs who will bait you into making a decision for the company. They'll say, "Hey, what would I do? What should I do in this situation?" And I'm very careful to say, I cannot tell you what to do. Because the minute you make a decision for that entrepreneur, they no longer own it. Now, if things don't go well, it's your fault. So you can't let entrepreneurs bait you into making a call, even when they ask you to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, the nuance there is pretty interesting, right? So we could unpack a lot there for sure. I mean, look, these are just fantastic insights. No matter where you're at on your journey, right, and who you're talking to raise money, and I really appreciate that. We've got about 7 or so minutes left. I'd like to talk about exits, right? So and I'll just put out a few ideas, and then let's, love to get different thoughts on them. But how do you think about the exit when you're looking at a company, and then how do you get the company ready to take that step to actually sell the company or look at an exit? And so I'll just put it out there, and maybe we can all feast on this question or these questions.
So I'll take a first stab at that. So, being an entrepreneur first, I think, or my advice is to always keep your options open, right? There should never be a time where you're not considering, offers that are made, conversations to be had, in part because, I've seen, a few things. One is, deals develop over time, just like David said that, some of their best deals came after they told the entrepreneur no a couple of times. I've seen so many exits happen with a company after the first or second time fell through over a period of years. And so even if you're not like in a position to want to exit right now, or things are going great, or you feel like, I'm going to, no matter what, I'm going to take a year or two, still have the conversation, still develop the relationships, because it's rare that if you want to exit, that it happens and you say, all right, I'm ready to start exiting now. And then, a couple months later, it starts happening, or those tend to not be the best exits because, it's something that, again, the relationship hasn't developed. It's a little bit harder. The better ones happen as you get to know a company or an organization over time, and you can develop that relationship, and then you're more credible, right? It's just like with fundraising. The worst time to be raising money or talking to investors is when you desperately need money. The best times to talk to investors is when you don't need the money. And so when you can start developing those conversations early, that sets you up well for the future. And I believe it's the exact same way on the M&A side. I personally believe every startup should have a corporate development function. Now, what does that mean? Corporate development, that's only, used at big companies. I don't think so. I think, every CEO, maybe in the beginning, or, maybe they have a business development person, should be developing relationships that aren't necessarily specifically just for sales. They're not just about selling your product, but developing a relationship with a company that may be a future partner, maybe a future acquirer, is a good practice to have. Again, it's not something that you need to have as a key function in the very early days. But again, if you don't have those relationships, and sometimes your need to sell happens at times that maybe you weren't estimating or predicting, or like, oh, we're about to go raise our Series B, that tends to be a good time to also consider what are the options out there for, selling the company. You want to be ready for that by having these relationships already kind of established versus like, oh, what can we drum up in the next, few weeks to see if anybody would want to buy the company. So to me, it's a relationship game. And the sooner you start that, the better. And I don't care how early you are in the company, it's never too early.
Yep. Others?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with Robbie's last point there. In our sector, in the pharma, biotech, and the medical devices and digital health, certainly, it takes time to develop relationships with the strategics. So you got to keep them up to date, keep them updated on progress in your clinical trials, whatever that might be. Continue to kind of capture their imagination and interest. So that's a process. Talk to investment bankers if you can, because I think they have a good appreciation of where the market is today, what different strategics may be looking for, where they may be looking to pivot. So having those relationships and those discussions frequently and often, I think, can be very, very helpful. Obviously, with the buyers, you need to understand where their needs are today, and so forth as well. Bringing the technology to the market can be very, very expensive. As we discussed earlier, product commercialization is probably the most difficult and the most challenging stage, I think, in any business at the end of the day, and requires very, very different skill sets. And for early entrepreneurs or first-time entrepreneurs who haven't done that before, that can be challenging. In one of our boards, we had a saying, all the board, nobody on the board understands engineering, but everybody on the board understands sales and marketing. Whereas in fact, nobody on the board understood sales and marketing probably. So it's very, very tough. I think there's a right time to exit. There's always a key value inflection point. So, use your board, your investors, investment bankers to try and figure out what is our right value inflection point for you at that particular point in time. And, as Robbie said, you use the time to develop the relationships and your credibility with the potential buyers as well.
Thanks.
David,
David, thoughts on the exit?
Well, I can tell Robbie, like me, is an operator at heart, but we talk about exits early on. I mean, one of the reasons I love first-time entrepreneurs is calls them crazy, but every time someone offers them a handful of $1 million, they take it, and so, I mean, there are some companies that shouldn't be venture-backed. And one of the discussions that I have pretty early on with a company we're interested in is, do you want to be a venture-backed company? It's okay to not be. There's a lot of great companies out there that grow organically. They don't take venture capital and they run their own show. Maybe they want a lifestyle business. Maybe it's something that they want to do for the next 20 years. That doesn't work for venture capital. We have an obligation to our investors that we need to get their money back within 10 years. preferably sooner. I come home, my wife says, "How'd you do today?" I say, "I'll tell you in 8 to 10 years." You know, it's a long game, but entrepreneurs there's nothing wrong, but they need to know that if they take venture capital, they have signed up for an exit as large and as quick as possible. And if that's okay and that aligns with their goals, then it might be a partnership that we'd be interested in. But we talk about exits early on. We spend a lot of time in our diligence modeling who would buy this company and why. And I can't echo enough what Robbie was saying. We push our companies or advise them to get business development going, to get a corp dev guy pretty quick. And startups hate doing that because those guys are expensive. Selling stuff is easy. You got a list of benefits, you go out and you pitch them. A business development person is really writing a custom business plan. They're trying to get partnerships. They're trying to get people who will resell your product. If you can get someone else's sales force to carry a quota on your product, golden. But those deals take 18 months on average to ink. And startups don't want to pay somebody for 18 months with no revenue coming in. You know, they're like attorneys. They want to bill hourly. And so it's a big investment to get some kind of business development effort underway, and for startups to agree that that's where they should put precious resources. But we try to push them that way because those are the gifts that keep on giving. Those deals can be company making. And I'll tell you, greater than 50% of the time, the company that buys you was first some kind of partner. They were either a reseller or a channel partner or a big customer. But you have some relationship with them before you run the M&A process. And so for all of those things, I think that exits are super important. Timing the exit and how much money you need. We are always deciding how much money a company needs by where's the next inflection point for the next round or for the acquisition. And so because if you're not, you kind of want to be breaking cash flow even. I know it's different in medical devices, but you want to pour every dollar into top line growth, because multiples today are a function of not only your recurring revenue, but also acceleration on that revenue has become increasingly important. So you're balancing those two numbers, and only right before you run a process do you want that company to become cash flow positive, because some M&A groups, they have money for M&A, they don't have that budget for supporting operations. So they don't want to have to go back and figure out whose budget is this going to come and who's going to sustain this. If they can buy it knowing that it's self-supporting, that really opens your field of buyers up dramatically.
Excellent. Well, we're actually, it's gone so fast. We're actually at the end of our time together. And David, Robbie, Daniel, I really appreciate your insights. Fantastic. And thanks for joining us today. And feel free, for folks that are watching, feel free to reach out to any of these folks if you have further questions. I'm going to hand it back over to Jeff, and have a great rest of the day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Are you considering selling your tech company? Head over to quorumgroup.com, our tech exit sponsor. If you'd like to learn more about selling your tech company, be sure to join us at our upcoming Tech M&A Masterclass event in Las Vegas, September 24th through 25th. Attendees of the Tech M&A Masterclass will gain practical knowledge on how to achieve the maximum valuation for their company, gained through expert-guided workshops, hands-on exercises, and M&A case studies. Head over to WFS.com for more details. We'll see you again for the next episode.